Good afternoon and welcome to the Divorce Support Club. This is our June edition. I'm joined today by Fiona Griffin from Walker Family Law, and together we aim to offer an additional service to the Simply Legal, a safe, informal place for you to ask any questions, gather a toolkit of resources, and focus on what you can do to get through what can be a really tricky time. My name's Claire Macklin. I'm a breakup and divorce coach. I work regularly with Walker Family Law. I'm a qualified coach. I've been divorced twice, and I was just totting up. I've been working out summer holidays since 2008. So that's about, I don't know, 16 years or something. So I've got lots of experience in how to sort summer holidays and how to help yourself through this period of time. So Fiona, would you like to introduce yourself as well so that everyone knows who you are too?
Yeah, thanks, Claire. So my name's Fiona Griffin, and I am a family solicitor at Walker Family Law. I will have been qualified for 25 years this year, and so that's 25 summers worth of helping parents to co-parent through the summer holidays and of course through the rest of the year, but we're particularly focusing on the summer holidays today.
Thank you very much. So today's topic is one that I know lots of my clients and lots of my friends and most parents find really challenging, managing the summer holidays while you're going through separation or divorce. You know, there are changes to routine, there are extended perhaps periods of time when your children might be away. You might have very different parenting styles. It might be really problematic even getting the arrangements in place to start with. You might need extra childcare. You know, there are lots of firsts as well if you're going through this perhaps for the first time, and it can be really stressful. So we're here really to perhaps give you some ideas for how you might be able to do things differently, give you some ideas about how you can plan more in advance, and give you some strategies essentially to cope better. So we thought we would break the session into several sections. So first of all, we're going to think about planning ahead and strategies perhaps for communication and strategies also to help you perhaps handle some of the frustration and not let it flood out into the rest of your life. And then we think we will talk about perhaps the time that you have with the children on your own, whether that's at home or away, and the time, of course, when the children are perhaps away with their other parent. And then we'll come on to, if we have time, to talk a little bit about blended families, perhaps, which adds a whole other layer of complication, and perhaps a little bit about solo traveling as well. So first of all, let's think about planning ahead. You know, I always say to my clients, plan, 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 plan early. If you haven't opened up your conversation about the summer holidays yet this year, then I would suggest that you do it as soon as you possibly can. Avoid putting it off in case it's difficult. Um, and enter into those communications as soon as you can, really. I'm sure you probably agree with that, Fiona, and I'm sure you say this to clients all the time as well.
Absolutely. And I think, if you've always been the parent who has generally planned the family holiday or planned the childcare, that won't have changed. The other person isn't necessarily going to naturally take on that for themselves, particularly in the first year of separation. And the other parent, may well not have the appreciation of how much planning actually needs to go into it. So I think you've got to be realistic about that, probably.
Mm, yeah, absolutely. And in terms of planning ahead, what would be your kind of top tips for how perhaps to do that, when to start, and how to start, and so on?
I mean, it really has got to be the earlier the better,
Mhm.
particularly if you are worried that you're not going to be able to agree certain arrangements with the other parent. Then you've got to sort of build in, a timeline
Mhm.
to finalise those arrangements, which might include, some form of non-court dispute resolution, such as family mediation, or even worst case scenario, a court application. So, you know, even by this time of year, that really is too late if you're thinking about needing a court application and you're going to be, really looking at the January, February is going to be your core planning time, thinking ahead to, the holidays that happen later in the year. So, yeah, definitely the earlier you can address things, the better. That's going to stand you in really good stead.
I suppose for those people who are listening who are going through this summer for the first time, this is a summer perhaps to notice how it goes, notice what works, notice what doesn't work, and start thinking, do I need to think about doing something next year at a much earlier point? Perhaps if it's really difficult this year and you think that mediation might be appropriate for next time, start thinking about that much earlier than now for next time. Um, so
Yeah,
that you can work that into your plan. And of course, your parenting plan, perhaps if you're putting together a parenting plan, this is something really to think about as part of those discussions.
yeah, absolutely. Because you're not going to get it all right first time, in all
Yeah,
probability. So, yeah, just do what you can in the time you have available. But the sooner you do start to have the difficult conversations, the better it's probably going to be.
absolutely. So that let's talk perhaps about some strategies that you might be able to use for perhaps having those really difficult conversations, those very sort of emotional conversations they might be. The first thing I would always advise people to do is to really think about who you want to be through this process. Where do you want your relationship with your ex-partner to get to? So, for example, a lot of my clients say to me that they want to go into this process and be very dignified and to be civil and to be polite. And I always think, brilliant, keep that right at the fore of your mind. And then the only bit you can control really is your part. So if you make sure that you are dignified and polite and civil and so on, that will go a really long way to kind of leading the discussions in that way. So setting your intention, I think, is really, really important. How do you want to behave and who do you want to be in these discussions? Because you can only control your part. And I think you had a really good mantra that you were talking about the other day, which was to treat your ex as you would like to be treated. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
I mean, this goes across the board, doesn't it,
Mm,
when we're co-parenting, but certainly around holidays, which is so important for everybody. We all work extremely hard and think we can build up holidays in our minds. It's a really important time of the year. So what I say to, clients that I'm working with is behave as you would want the other parent to behave towards you. And that goes across the board, whether that's letting the other parent know something about what you're planning to do with the children, keeping the children in touch with the other parent when they're in your care for perhaps a longer period of time, involving perhaps the wider family of the other parent. Were grandparents generally part of your childcare in the summer? Well, don't cut them off just because it's a difficult time through separation. They're a really key part of your children's family. So, and obviously you wouldn't want your parents probably being cut off from spending time with the children. So that's my mantra is treat the other parent as you would want to be treated, and hopefully, if they're slightly resistant, you can model some really good co-parenting behaviour that they will hopefully pick up on.
yeah, yeah. I mean, thinking about really classic examples that I've seen or even experienced myself. I remember once my ex-husband organised a family holiday for him and his wife and the children, but they didn't think to tell me the dates beforehand. And I remember getting this email saying we've booked a holiday. And although I didn't have anything booked at that time, it put my back up because I was thinking, well, what if I'd wanted to go at that point in time? So I raised this with them and said, this when you emailed me this, it felt very much like that. I was annoyed, I was upset, I was, all of these things. Can we agree that before we book anything, we will always email each other, and can we agree that we will always reply in a timely fashion? And since then, it's all worked okay, because we're all reasonable people. I know in not all situations, not everybody is reasonable, but you absolutely have control over your own part in this. And I think if you can get to 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, and think, I always behaved well, that's a really powerful thing to be able to think. It's very empowering to be able to think, I behaved well, even if my ex didn't. I always behaved really well. Another thing that I always did, and I always advise my clients to do, is to try and be proactive. So take the lead, perhaps. Consider putting a proposal to your ex-partner about how you would like to divide the holidays up. I always found it was really good if I could kind of get in there early with a proposal for dates, and then there's time to communicate about it. There's time to add in various things that they might have in their diaries and I might have in my diaries, and so it can be a bit of back and forth. Um, Something that's worked really well for a client of mine recently, whose ex was quite difficult, was to say, I would like to take the children away on holiday for this week in the summer holidays. Please let me know by the end of Friday, 5 o'clock on Friday, whether there's any issue with that. Otherwise, I'll go ahead and book. And that kind of turned their communication around, because previously she had been writing and almost asking permission, and he then wasn't responding. And so she was left then very stressed about, could she book this holiday or couldn't she book this holiday? And phrasing it like that just enabled her to feel like she was staying a bit in control of what she could and couldn't do, and she was setting very clear boundaries. Um, so yeah, in terms of that, be proactive, um, put your ideas out there. Don't be afraid to do so.
Absolutely, particularly if perhaps you haven't been the person that's generally
Mm.
planned the family holiday. Now's your chance to shine in a way and put a plan forward that you'd like to be able to do with the children.
Yeah. And I think the other thing we were talking about when we were preparing for this as well was around not co-parenting with rigidity, I think was the phrase that you used, which I really liked. Um, so part of that is opening these discussions early and being able to have a few back and forth and communication around it. Um, but tell me a little bit more about not parenting with rigidity, because that was a really good mantra as well that I think that you had the other day.
Yeah, I think it's for me when I see really good examples of co-parenting with my clients, it's where yes, you've got a plan and everybody knows what that looks like, and particularly that's good for the children at various stages that they know what's going to be happening. But also, life happens. Also, there are family events, weddings, and christenings, and parties that happen through the summer that may mean that that plan needs to shift. And that's okay as well. I think you can sometimes box yourself into a corner, particularly for parents who may have court orders in place, because a court order is a very rigid document. It will say explicitly, in all probability, it will say explicitly what time the children are spending where. But these things aren't written in stone, they're not tablets of stone, and you are still permitted and allowed by the law to vary that arrangement by agreement. And I think, what you were saying, Claire, keeping the children at the centre, how would they like their summer to be? That's as important as anything, I think.
Yeah. And in terms of, keeping the children at the center, one of the worst things for children is to be caught in that kind of conflict between their parents, where they feel like they're being pulled and pushed or having to choose between their parents. So, don't use your children as messengers, for example. Don't ask them to take sides, don't ask them to choose. Children need to feel safe. They need to feel safe and they need to feel heard and seen and secure. And part of that is knowing that their parents can communicate with each other and they can trust their parents to sort things out. So, a family wedding or something, if they can trust their parents to civilly work out how they're going to factor that in, then that will help children to feel safer and more secure, I think. something else that I talk about a lot with clients is around checking in with your motivations. So sometimes your gut instinct perhaps might be to say no or to argue back or defend yourself or whatever it might be. But check in with your motivations, check in with yourself. Is is my motivation really about my need or is it about the children's need? Will this change, for example, to their routine? Will this change to our plan benefit the children? What's in it for them and how will it work for them? So just checking in and being really honest with yourself. Is this actually about me being angry with my ex-partner, or is this about what the children need? And because I think it's really important to separate those two roles, in separating the role of your ex-partner as your ex-partner, and you might have fallen out really big time with them in that context, but remembering that they are also your fellow parent. And I think it's really important to start separating those two roles. When you're married and you're together, those two roles are kind of all jumbled up together, but now they become very different. And so I think if you can see your ex in your head as your ex and in your head separately as your fellow parent, that can really help in terms of thinking about how you're communicating with them and which one of them you're communicating with at any particular time.
Yeah,
Um,
it's almost like having a colleague, isn't it, really?
mm,
That your
yeah,
your joint task is to parent these children. You don't have any, you're teasing out the emotional relationship now, moving away from that. And I think
yeah,
this brings us back to the point of, if your co-parent is asking for some flexibility and you're tempted to say no because perhaps they've denied you flexibility in the past. I see that often.
yeah,
Well, why should I agree to that other person always wants to change things last minute, but if I ask for a change, then it's always a no. But two wrongs will never ever make a right, in any circumstance. So I think it comes back to this. We control our own behaviour, we can reflect on our own good behaviour and model good behaviour. That's all we can ever do, no matter what we think we might get back from the other person.
yeah, absolutely. I remember when I was going through my divorce the first time, thinking I want to take the high road. Effectively, it's a nice place to be when you're kind of on the moral high ground. It's a good place to be because you can know that you have always behaved with integrity at that point. And that's a really powerful thing to be able to do. Um, there are I think there are some apps and things as well that people use that can help with this kind of thing. We were talking about our family wizard the other day, and I think that's not the only one now. There are others of them, but those can be really useful. And I think you've probably seen clients use those to really good effect.
Yeah, they are. I mean, there are various ones now, and paid for and free, different models out there. I think they can really help with communication because usually a shared calendar function. So, the sooner you can populate that, the better. The messaging functions, they're set up so that messages can't be deleted or edited. Sometimes we do sadly see some shenanigans around messages being edited or deleted. And they also have a tone monitor. Some of them have a built-in AI that helps you to reflect on your own tone. If you're tempted to flash a message back,
Mm.
it will warn you if that message could come across badly. So yeah, there's various elements there that make them a really useful tool. Perhaps it's almost a bit like training wheels, really, for your communication. It may be as the years go on that you're able to move away from using an app for communication, but I think definitely in the early part of a separation, they're a great thing for parents who are, going through the training wheel stage of co-parenting.
Mm. And it keeps everything in one place as well, doesn't it? So you've got your calendar and your communication and everything else all in one place. And then you can print things out from it, I think, as well, and all that kind of thing. So you've got your agreement then in writing, which for many people will be a really important thing to have this have any agreement that you do come to in writing, whether that's through an app or whether that's through an email. Having your agreement written down is always going to be really helpful. One other thing that I think we could talk about in terms of any changes in flexibility might be around setting expectations, and setting expectations for, if you want to change, to let the other person know as soon as you can, or giving at least 48 hours notice or whatever it might be. Um, and one thing that I was always really grateful for was, if my ex-husband had to go away for work, for example, during a period of time that something came up suddenly, for example, he would message me and see if I wanted or could have the children as a kind of first, I had first right of refusal, if you like. It didn't mean that I always had to say yes, but it meant that I was always the person he asked first. And I think, things like that, setting those kind of expectations can also be really helpful.
Yeah, very much so. I think that is one of the flashpoints that we often
Mm.
see is
Yeah.
where, a parent will choose almost anybody else other than the other co-parent to pick up the slack
Mhm.
if they've got a childcare problem, and it always goes
Mhm.
down badly with the other parent. So, I try
Yeah.
and avoid it wherever possible. And
Mm.
with this expectations, I think, setting the expectation that you are going to be open and honest about, if you've got any travel arrangements coming up. I think again, it's very reason. It's obviously not reasonable to expect the other parent to give you a minute by minute, blow by blow account of everything they've got planned down to the last hour. But it is reasonable to know where your children, if they're going to be travelling, even out of the area. It's quite common, isn't it, in this area that parents will go down to Devon or to Cornwall for short trips away. But I still think it's reasonable, for you to know if your children are not going to be at the home of the other parent for an overnight or any amount of time. That's a reasonable thing that you should expect the other
Mm.
person to tell you about and keep you informed about.
Yeah. The other expectation that we always had in place was the expectation that if I telephoned or if he telephoned, we would always pick up. Now that we have mobile phones, it's made it so much easier. But if he rings me, we trust each other not to ring if it isn't absolutely necessary. But we agree that we will always pick up. And I know that that doesn't always work for some people. Some people need to put boundaries around when they will and won't pick up. But if you can um, come to those kind of agreements, that can be really helpful as well. So I know now that if his name flashes up, there is actually something that I do need to hear, and I pick the phone up and we sort things out together. Um, but some people, of course, may need to put in boundaries in a different way. And I think that comes up quite often with clients who have a very tricky ex-partner who perhaps bombards them with calls or bombards them with messages. Then I think it's really important to say something along the lines of, I will look at your messages once a day, but I'm not going to answer the phone every time you call, or I won't do it in working hours or whatever it might be. Work out what your boundaries are because every situation is, of course, different. Um, and if trust is eroded, then perhaps you need some stronger, firmer boundaries in place.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we sometimes will need to go to the extremes of having a phone that is a dedicated phone that you
Mm.
just use for your communication with the other parent.
Yeah,
Self-protective measures such as those, if the other parent's behaviour is towards the more extreme end of problematic.
yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So I thought it might be useful as well to perhaps talk a little bit about some strategies to just stay calm during these communications. So these are things that are just for you, that you can do to help bring down the kind of threat response, of fight, flight, freeze response that might come every time an email perhaps pings in, or a WhatsApp pings in from your ex. First of all, breathing. And I talk about this all the time, but when something like that pops in, take a moment just to breathe and to calm your heart rate down. So breathing in and counting to four, holding it for four, breathing out and counting to four, and then holding it for four again. And just do that maybe 3 or 4 times before you even open the email or the text, just to get your heart rate down. Um, I always try to leave 24 hours between an email coming in and responding, because that gives you time to calm if you need to. If the response makes you feel angry or upset, it gives you time to perhaps sleep on it. And it gives you time to perhaps talk it through with a therapist or a coach or your solicitor or a friend. And it just gives you a little bit of space from an immediate response. I think when there's a danger, isn't there, with an immediate response that's fueled by anger or upset, that it escalates the conversation beyond where it needs to go. And something that a lot of my clients find really helpful is to keep a photograph of their children next to their computer, or have it in front of them when they're sending an email or a message about the summer holidays, just to remind you that these are the people that this is really about, the children. Um, and the thought of, imagine the children might read the emails that you're sending now in 10, 15, 20 years' time. How are they going to feel about it? I know that I would much rather my children read an email in which I was being measured and calm and sensible than one in which I had kind of splurged my anger all over the page. So really worth thinking about things like that. Um,
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, I mean, I think yeah, keeping the children in the forefront of this, and none of us respond well from a gut reaction. So I think that's really good advice to try and prevent yourself from
yeah,
hitting send before you've really had chance to think
yeah.
about
I
things.
mean, by all means, tap out the really angry email as a draft, keep it in your drafts folder, come back to it, delete it, start again. 24 hours later is always a really good idea. The other thing I think is in your emails, because you're in charge of your side of all this communication, you're in charge of what you write. So avoid writing things like, you always do this and you never give me enough time, and you are such a whatever word you might want to use at that point. Take all of that out and own your part. So you might say something like, I your email arrived yesterday, and I found it very difficult, but I'm now able to think much more clearly, and this is my response, for example. Or when you said that, um, when you said this, I felt whatever it was that I felt. Own your part, rather than you. So read through your draft email and try and take out anything where it's saying you did this, you did that, because that's very accusatory and is always, almost always anyway, going to be met with the kind of stop response, and then you get into defense territory. And that's when things can really escalate. So if you can keep in the forefront of your mind that actually what you're trying to do is find a solution or a compromise that works for the children, I think that's a really good way to think about it and to look at it. Should we ever think about the time when you're perhaps with the children on your own? Because I
Mm.
know that for some parents have never really, perhaps they've never spent a week or 2 weeks with their children on their own. I mean, I know I hadn't, even though I was the parent that was at home more. I'd never spent 2 weeks with my children by myself, the first time I had to do it. And that could be really daunting. Um, so it can be really daunting. It can be quite overwhelming, perhaps, and you might have all sorts of things to juggle. But again, I think planning ahead is really key here, and involving the children, perhaps in planning that time. Perhaps sit down with them with a big piece of paper, depending on how old they are, obviously. Sit down with them with a big piece of paper and ask them, what kind of things would you like to do this summer? Where would you like to go? Are there people you'd like to see? Are there activities you'd like to do? Or is there anything you'd like to learn over the summer? I was talking to a client today whose son had asked if he could have some singing lessons. And so she's arranged some singing lessons for the time that he's with her over the summer. Jot all those things down, stick that list on the fridge, and start ticking them off. Start, commit to actually organising some of those things so you make it a really good shared time together. Um, I think that can really help if it's something that you're not used to doing. Um,
Absolutely.
mm,
Yeah, I think also what I would say is don't overschedule,
mm,
because I think it's a great a great temptation for parents in this position, particularly in the early part of the separation, to be overcompensating for, you may have feelings of guilt or shame about your separation, and that does lead to overcompensation, I think, when it comes to arranging things with the
Mm.
children. um, and I think you, as much as you possibly can, um, think about more normal life. If the children spend the day watching a film and playing some computer games, it's not the end of the world
Yeah,
for a few days in the summer holidays. Also, of course, in a separation, finances may well look very different to how they looked in previous summers when you had combined incomes to create a holiday. So I think, depending on the ages of the children, for older children, I think it's reasonable for you to have that conversation with them and be realistic about what your finances are, and
yeah.
don't get into a financial mess to
Mm.
drive the overcompensation.
Yeah,
Um,
and avoid getting into a competition,
yeah,
a financial competition to show the children a better time than your ex-partner and spend more money than them and those kinds of things. I see people fall into that trap
mm,
fairly often. And I've been divorced a long time now, but even a couple of years ago, my youngest son said to me, "Mum, are we going on holiday this summer with you? Because Dad's arranged this and that. And I know that normally we do this, but do you know what? I just want to spend some time at home." And it's really important to just spend some time not doing very much.
yeah,
Sometimes, the school year is tiring. Everyone's a bit exhausted at the end of it. So it's nice to just spend some time not doing very much at
yeah.
all
I
sometimes.
don't resent the time that the children want to spend with friends. I think as well as they
Mm.
get older. I mean, I've parented two teenagers, and let's face it, they don't want to be spending time one on one with us all the time. I
No.
mean, you wouldn't expect that if you still lived as as your previous family unit, and they'd be spending some time locked in their rooms, just like all teenagers across the world. So,
Mm.
I think forcing them into, right now we're going to do this, now we're going to do that, not
Yeah,
not
it's
a
very
recipe
it's
for happiness.
no, it's very tempting though, isn't it? Sometimes to think, well, I've only got the children for this week, and I need to cram in as much as possible. Um, and so I do sometimes see parents refusing a party invitation or not allowing the children to go to a sleepover or whatever it might be because it's my time with them. And I think that
Mm,
again comes back to the motivation point, doesn't it? What's your actual motivation here? Is it about what you need or you want, or is it about what the children need and what they want? And as they grow up, they break away, and it's
mm,
what's meant to happen. Even if it means that you perhaps miss out on a couple of days with them over the summer. Um,
absolutely.
mm, yeah. One very practical tip, especially if you've got younger children who get confused perhaps about where they're going to be and want to know how many sleeps and all that kind of thing, is to perhaps get a calendar and color code it
Mm,
so that they know where they are and when they are, and so they know when they're moving between houses and where they're going to be at particular points in time. And
yeah,
that can be really helpful so that they've got a
yeah.
visual what that
Love a
looks like.
sticker for that. Love a pack of stickers for that. That's
Yeah, yeah. I remember colouring blocks in coloured pen, yellow for me and blue for daddy or whatever it might have been.
yeah.
Um, yeah. And then there's that time when the children are perhaps away with their other parent, and that can be really difficult, especially the first time that suddenly you might have to spend a week or 2 weeks away from your children, and you've perhaps not spent even a night away from them before, and that can be really, really hard. Um, so what I would say is talk to somebody about those things. Don't put that on the children. So talk to somebody else, talk to your friends, perhaps talk to your coach, talk to a therapist, um, and send the children off on that time with positivity, with a clear message of, have fun, enjoy the time away. I'll be here when you get back. give the children permission to enjoy that time without worrying or feeling guilty or um, being concerned that perhaps you were very upset when they left. Try and really try really hard to hold it together for them. I remember my youngest son once asked me what I did when they weren't here. I don't think he could quite understand that I might have other things to do than just be
Just sit,
around.
wait.
Just sit and wait for them to get home. So I shared with him a couple of things that I was going to do with my friends and activities that I was going to do for myself that I couldn't do when they were around. And that meant that he felt much more comfortable about going off and leaving me what he thought originally was at home on my own, just waiting for him to come back.
Yeah, I think
Um,
children think about what they would feel if they were left, and that's natural, isn't it?
yeah.
That they can only perceive things in through a very small lens of their life experience, which isn't very great. So
Mm,
for them to understand that parents have a completely separate life that doesn't involve them,
mm,
um, and also talk about the things that you used to do before they even came along.
mm.
I think again it gives them a perception of mum or dad as a person, not
Yeah,
just mum and dad. So I think
yeah,
those are really interesting. And they're usually really interested, aren't they, the children? If you say, well, do you know what? Before I had you, I used to go off and do this thing or that thing. So I'm going to I'm going to re-engage with that hobby.
yeah. And actually, if you can reframe the time that they're away into something that is precious and valuable to you, then that makes it so much easier to handle. I remember my time without the children became actually quite a precious thing. It was a time to recharge. It was a time for me to visit friends who perhaps didn't have children or who I couldn't go with couldn't take the children there or it was a time for me to put the glass down, the weight of being the sole parent. It was time for me to be able to put that down and do some things just for myself. And I think, that the key really is to focus on what you can control, to focus on what you could gain rather than what you might feel you're losing. Because where you focus, your feelings will follow. And after the first few months, I found that actually I began to look forward to the time when the children were away. Although at the beginning that seemed like a really alien idea that I'd never get to that point. Actually, I did because I really worked on thinking about who I used to be and what I used to enjoy and what I wasn't able to do anymore and how I could then put some of those things back into my life. And so that time became really quite precious and valuable.
It's normal though, isn't it,
Yeah.
to find this a challenge? I think,
Mm,
we're putting forward lots of positive recommendations in this time together this afternoon, but I think we should acknowledge that
yeah.
this may well be a challenge, and it's okay to
Mm,
feel that you're challenged
yeah.
by this time. So I think being kind to yourself, and reaching out perhaps to friends or family who might have
Mm,
some shared experience of it, um, so that you're well supported. Because certainly for the first summer holiday, you're not going to get this all right, are you?
no.
And I think if you're curious about the things that you did felt challenged by, and sort of what you can do perhaps differently the next time you come to a holiday. And you've got another one coming up in October half term, so it's not that long away. You get opportunities throughout the year to explore all of these things.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. It's really, none of these sort of positive suggestions are intended to diminish that this can be really painful and it can be really difficult. And there might be all sorts of different feelings swirling around, especially if, this perhaps isn't something that you've chosen. Um, you know, I remember the first summer after my husband left, I hadn't chosen this. I didn't want it. And so that it makes it really difficult and very painful. So I think acknowledging how you feel about it is also really important. And perhaps journaling, like you say, surrounding yourself with your support network, with people who help you to, people who really care about you and are supportive of you in a way that really works. is really important to do. Shall we talk a little bit about communication with the children
Mm.
while they're on holiday with their other parent? Because I imagine you get asked about this quite a lot.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think, if you are thinking of drawing up a parenting plan, it's one of the good things to, going back to those what expectations do we have? And this is going to evolve probably as the children get older. It will change again when they've got devices, mobile phones of their own, and you can just send them the odd text message. But if you are communicating when the children are smaller, you're probably communicating via the other parent. And so that needs that. I think you've got a really good phrase in your um, notes that we put together for this. It's functionally friendly. I really liked that.
Mm,
And I think that's what you've got to be thinking of. I mean, everybody will have a different view. I think if the children are away for a week, it's very reasonable to expect a couple of check-ins during a week visit. And so if they're then away 2 weeks, maybe three or four check-ins, depending on the age of the children and their needs and wants.
mm,
But sadly, for the parent who is perhaps struggling, it is unreasonable to expect to be called every day. I think, that is intrusive, and I think sometimes we just have to call it as we see it. You can't expect to get a call on every single day of somebody else's holiday,
yeah.
and unless you're going to offer that the other way round, unless you've been, doing that up until this point. But I think for most people that is going to be overly intrusive. So I think you've got to try and manage your own expectations around that. It's
Mm,
reasonable
yeah.
for you to know that the
Yeah.
children are with the other parent and that is going to be their time.
Yes, and obviously we're talking here about when there's trust between you, and there's not, it's beyond the scope of this particular conversation in terms of if there are real safeguarding issues. We're
Mm,
making an assumption here that that's not the case. But
yeah,
yes, I completely agree. If the children are away with their other parent, then it is really intrusive to expect or demand FaceTime or whatever it might be every day. And I think certainly from the experience of my children, that was quite disruptive potentially as well. That you know, it's nice of it's good for them. They get a really clear message from them if you're happy for them to go with their other parent and that you're not checking in all the time. That it's okay to have a really good time. That it's okay to enjoy themselves. Um, I think also, think about the particular children because sometimes it might be that perhaps having that phone call might distress them. And it might be that your fellow parent could just maybe send a couple of photos every sort of other day or something, just to show that they've been in the pool or they've been playing on the beach or whatever it is that they might have been doing. But again, have these conversations beforehand so that you know what to expect. I remember having a conversation once with a client who was her daughter was worried about going away with her dad, and she came to talk to me about what she could possibly do. And actually, what we came up with was that the daughter was really worried about missing mum and not being able to speak to her every day. Um, and what she did was she went away and spoke to her daughter, and what they found was that what she really needed was something that just reminded her of her mum. So she ended up going shopping with her, and they bought like a little cuddly bear thing on a key ring. Um, and that bear then became sort of a symbolic mum figure. And so all she really wanted to do was just say goodnight to that every night. Um, and so they went and bought that, and that was enough. So have conversations with your children, really dig into exactly what it is they might be worried about if they're worried. And there are always other things you can do. You could perhaps send them away with a little card saying, "Hope you have a lovely trip. See you when you get home. Have fun." That kind of thing, so that they can put it up perhaps while they're away and things like that.
yeah.
Yeah, I agree with
And
you completely.
can I just so if you're the parent on the other side of that, because I
Mm,
come across this, so if you're if you're the parent who You've now got a child with you and they're saying goodnight to a key ring that represents the other parent. Don't mind. It does
Yeah.
not matter. I think um,
Yes.
some parents feel that the other parent is in this tug of love, and having something that represents them with the child is sort of them overbearing onto the child. It isn't. It's just part of this overall journey. And I think if you're the other parent who's on the other side of that, try not to mind it. You
Yeah.
perhaps will mind it, but try not to. It's all just part of the journey that you're both wanting. Like I said before, you are colleagues in a co-parenting job, and
Yeah.
this is part of the strategy to co-parent. It's enabling that child to come and stay with you, so try not to mind it.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point to make. Thank you. Blended families. So when you're organising a holiday as a blended family, a whole other level of organisation. I've been in this position as well with a partner and stepchildren, juggling those multiple households. If communication is really important when there's the two of you, then communication is even more important, perhaps in this context as well. So um, flexibility, patience, um, compassion, perhaps stepping into the other person's shoes and just imagining what it's like to be the other people can really help to gain that sort of understanding of where the other people might be coming from. And so I think, yeah, all the advice we've given so far is just kind of almost magnified when you've got a blended situation, and emotions can be very heightened.
Yeah. And don't put all the, I would say, don't put all your eggs in one basket, in as much as if you end up with children spending all of their time away, then it may be better to take a view and say, well, this year actually, we'll go away in Easter, or we'll go away in the May half term. And when the children are with me over the summer, we're just going to do normal day to day. We're not actually going to go away, because I think you could just become completely overwhelmed. And
Yeah.
certainly the children could be overwhelmed.
Mm.
And of course, the older the children get, they might have things like homework tasks to
Yeah.
complete over the summer. You've got to give them some breathing space and some time to do that. And it may be that for that one year, you're going to have to suck it up. You're going to have to be the boring parent where they do spend, a few days doing that homework task.
Yeah. I think
I
it's
think as
interesting. So
long
we
as we
kind of,
see
sorry.
round, as long
Mm.
as we can see it in the round of the year.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, exactly. I think, sometimes we think that if we're not taken away, that's we're being the boring parent. But actually, as I learned a few years ago, the children just wanted that. They wanted to have some time where they just didn't do very much at home. Um, and they could spend a bit of time, in the park, just doing normal everyday things. So um I think we're almost at the end probably now, but there's probably just a couple of other issues, and one is just one that I get asked a lot, and is a real legal question. So if I want to travel abroad, do I need the other person's consent, and what can I do if they don't give it?
Mm, okay. So, strictly speaking, if you haven't got a court order in place that enables travel abroad as part of it, yeah, strictly speaking, in order to go out of what we call the jurisdiction, which is England and Wales, so even, trip to the Highlands of Scotland is included as outside of the jurisdiction, you do need the other parent's consent. Now, is it the case that probably hundreds of thousands of parents take their children abroad without written consent of the other parent? Yes. And I think everybody's probably had that experience of going through passport control or whatever, and no questions have been asked because you're traveling on a British passport, nobody cares. But could you be asked that question? Yes, you could. So technically speaking, you do need the consent of the other parent. And let's hope it won't be unreasonably withheld. But you might find yourself in a position where you have genuine reasons to be concerned about your child being taken abroad. and then you should act on that concern and get some legal advice. And on the flip side, if you think the other person is going to unreasonably withhold their consent to, what is absolutely a holiday, you've got the return date and all the rest of it, you're definitely coming back, then you can apply to the court for something called a specific issue order, um, to enable that trip. But I think the best advice would probably be to have a child arrangements order made. And in a child arrangements order, um, if the order says the children live with you for a certain amount of time and they live with the other parent for a certain amount of time, that will have inbuilt the legal ability to take your children out of the jurisdiction for holidays for up to 4 weeks in any
Right.
period. So that would be, probably the most sensible thing to do if you think, particularly if you think you're going to come up against this problem again and again and again,
Yeah.
and that every year you're going to have this worry. That's probably the best course of action to take.
Brilliant. Thank you. That's really clear. So I think, just to recap over everything we've done, there are kind of some overriding or overarching messages here, and there's some nice little mantras that we've used during the session. So, co-parenting, not from a place of rigidity. Um, the couple that I really like, kids first, ego last. This is
Mm.
about the children. This isn't about what I need. This is about what they need, in order to feel secure and so on. And another one that I see often is, just remind yourself you love your children more than you dislike your ex. Um, and so keep that one in the front of your mind. And really, the children thrive when their parents can communicate with each other, when they feel
Mm.
safe and secure in their relationships with both of you. And just keeping that in the forefront of your mind all the time goes perhaps a long way to helping you maintain that kind of that moral high ground effectively. Is there anything you'd like to quickly add on the end of there before we finish?
Um, yeah, just be kind to yourself, because it is a journey, and co-parenting isn't something, like you said, you may not expect to find yourself in this situation. It's not going to come naturally 100% of the time. You're not going to get it right 100% of the time, but you just give yourself the space to try.
Mm. Yeah, thank you. So I hope that everybody listening has gained a lot of tips from that really useful conversation. We will be back in July, um, and there will be an email sent out about that and so on and so forth in due course. So Fiona, thank you very much for coming along today and sharing all of your experience. That 25 years of experience that you've got under your belt is so helpful to people. And if you're watching and it's your first summer, as Fiona said, be kind to yourself. This really is a difficult time, and it does get easier as time goes on. So look after yourselves, and we will see you next time.
Okay.